and newsagents.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for allowing us into your home here in Surbiton, or your garden anyway.
Yeah.
You've warned us already that the foxes are just down about
10
feet away from us.
We've
terrified them away. So if they do appear, then we might have to make an emergency exit. But let's persevere. I suppose one of the reasons I wanted to do this, since obviously it's not long from your conference, but it seems to me in a way that in the kind of post-general election haze and all of the stories that have come out of it and the changes in our politics, maybe the success of the Lib Dems at that election has been underappreciated or underreported. You now got over 70 MPs.
72.
72, yeah. Let's be absolutely precise. Can't forget those two. The Lib Dems are a very different force to what they were. How have you reflected on this change since the general election?
Well, it certainly feels very different, and I think the other parties have probably noticed not just the sheer scale of the numbers in the chamber, but the fact that if you look at the record books, we're the largest third party since 1923. There's no doubt it broke the records in terms of the number of MPs for the party.
Was it better? I mean, we spoke during the general election campaign. Was it a better result than you had hoped for?
Yeah, it was. I mean, during the election, you could feel that people really liked what we were saying. To rehearse it, we really focused on the NHS and care and sewage and the cost of living. I think people really responded to that. And I was really taken in by the way people like not just the funny things we did, because we did a few of those, you might remember, but also the very serious message we had, whether it's what I was saying about carers with our election video or what we were saying with our policy. And what was really interesting for me, and it's a real lesson, we did all those stunts, from the bungee jumping to the paddle boards, but we had more airtime for Liberal Democrat policies and ideas. More than I can ever remember. It was my 8th election. We spoke about what Liberal Democrats stand for.
Because of the stunts,
I think so. I think it, for whatever reason, you might have a view on it from your side of the fence, but people turn up, listened, and we had the chance to make our case, and I'm very grateful for that.
We should talk about the stunts, because obviously it generated a huge amount of interest. You did all sorts of things. What was your favourite?
Yeah, it was the slip and slide in Somerset.
Right,
that was great fun. And we talked about mental health, and that was the bit. You see, we had great fun, and I'm delighted to say Anna Sabine was elected to be the MP
because of the slip and slide, no doubt.
Well, I think she's a great MP, but a great local champion. But the slip and slide, you guys came, everyone got wet, but we were able to talk about the mental health of children and young people, which was our message we wanted to get over.
Did your team ever propose anything that you vetoed? Was there a bridge too far?
Well, I think there was a bit of self-censorship because they realised that would have broken health and safety rules.
Right, okay. No sort of like paintballing or something that you said no to, or naked paintballing or anything like that?
No, I think they just came up with very good ideas, and very proud of the team.
Okay. But there's a serious element to it, in that, some people criticised all of that. They said that this is quite demeaning. It's sad, and I can sort of see this bit of it, that maybe it's a bit sad, or maybe it says something about our media political culture, that maybe it's a bit facile, that a senior party leader who had been a cabinet minister had to do that sort of thing to get attention. Do you think that? And would you repeat it now you're the leader of the third biggest party?
Well, I thought about it before and since, and if you track back, if you remember those by-election victories we had during the last Parliament in Cheshire Amersham, North Shropshire, in Tiverton Honiton, in Somerton Froome, and the local election victories we achieved, we created visuals around those, if you remember, knocking down the blue wall famously,
yes,
the door and the bubble and all the rest of it. And what we found was we were able to get coverage, yes, and get noticed, but we were able to get over a serious message as well. It was that combination that attracted me and the team to do it more in the election. And then the other thing is about trying to make our politics more optimistic, more hopeful, more fun. So much of politics in all Western democracies actually has become divisive, telling people what you're against, being very negative. And I think it enabled us to shake that off. And to show that, we're ordinary people, we've got a very serious message, we're in this for values we hold very, very dearly, but we can put it over in a way which is much more positive and constructive.
Will you keep doing it? Or was it a one-off?
Well, I want to keep being positive and constructive, and and hopefully attracting people to our cause, which it clearly did in the election. I don't know about the stunts. I'm sure there might be one at conference. You have to come along.
Well, of course, we'll be there. How are you thinking about how you're going to approach opposition? Because it has been a long time since the Lib Dems were the third biggest party in opposition. Obviously, you were in government from 2010 to 15, so you've got to go back 15 years. You've gone from a situation where you had a handful of MPs to actually not being that far off the Conservative Party. I mean, you're only 50 off where the Conservative Party are, which is an astonishing thing. So what does it mean for the Lib Dems? I mean, how do you approach opposition? Now you've had some time to reflect on it over the summer. What are the principles and what are your approaches to how you oppose, and Lib Dems oppose, a Labour government rather than the Conservative one?
Well, first of all, you do that job both as an opposition and a political party by showing what you stand for, being constructive, being positive, showing that we can be more hopeful. And you also do that by being true to the mandate we achieved. So one of the big things that I've been talking about is trust, actually, because we lost the trust. I mean, lots of political parties have lost the trust of people, and it was a hard road to win it back through the by-elections, local elections I was talking about, and through the general election. And that's still work in progress. We've still got to win that trust every day. And in the election, we fought on policy, focus on NHS and care right at the centre. We talked a lot about the cost of living, the real life experiences of people, talked a lot about the environment, sewage and things like that. And I'm determined that now we have this huge third party force now, nipping at the heels of the Conservatives, that we keep to those priorities. They were the priorities we got elected for. We've got 72 people who will be their champions in the local area, but who will come together to focus on those sorts of issues. And we'll hold the government to account. That's our job. I hope we'll do it in a way that is more constructive than is normally done. Where we agree with them, we'll say we agree with them, but maybe want them to go further. We can talk about those different issues in a second if you like. But where we disagree with them, we'll be really clear. So already on the winter fuel payments, for example, we're really clear this is the wrong thing to do. So we want to be positive, put our ideas over, our values, and show that the trust that we have won back, we will be true to.
I want to talk about the winter fuel allowance question specifically, but just on terms of the government's 2 months old now, and how do you think they're doing?
Well, there've been some things that I agree with. Let's be clear. I think it's good that he's going around Europe and trying to rebuild that relationship. I think he should go further. For example, there's been this talk about a youth mobility scheme. I think we should do one. We've got one with Japan and Korea and Australia and
Why
others.
do you think he won't do it, or he seems so reluctant? He's got a big majority.
I don't know. We'll make the case and we'll see if they listen. I hope he will do, because rebuilding that relationship with Europe is really important.
You'll give him the votes for that if he does propose it.
We will support what we believe in. Another example, I thought his response to Grenfell was really good, not just in the way he responded to this tragedy and the inquiry that was set up, but also that he sort of understands that the system is broken. And I think when I reflect on the last few years, there's been so many times, so many scandals when it's been clear the system is broken, whether it's on everything from contaminated blood to Horizon to Hillsborough, and now to this Grenfell horror. And I think when he talked, and I thought quite passionately actually, I thought it was one of his best performances in the Commons, about the need to change the system, I felt that was right, change the culture. And in many ways that's what we fought the election on. Not just on electoral reform and change the political system, but when we talked about care, and I gave my story about being a carer, it's from my sense that the system, on the NHS in particular, has forgot that side of the equation. That's why people's health policies have failed in the past. But it's also because there's a whole group of people in society who the state just rides roughshod over, doesn't listen to. Whether it's the council tenants, people in social housing, and you heard that in Grenfell, whether it's the sub-postmaster, whether it's the football fans, whether it's unpaid family carers. And I'm determined that we move away from the politics of division and being negative and having a go, and saying, look, here are these people whose voices are not heard, we're going to be their voice.
You bring up care. Rachel Reeves has made it clear that despite what Labour said in their manifesto, that certainly for the time being there is not going to be a fundamental reform of the social care system. I know, people will know, this is an issue close to your heart. You must be very disappointed by that. What do you make of that retreat?
Yeah, I am disappointed on their decision not to go ahead with the cap on social care costs. That's what the Conservatives did, and I criticise them. So I'll criticise this government for it. And we will be pushing on it. I mean, there are so many aspects of the carer issues. You know, there's the social care, which governments keep walking away from, and why we've argued for a cross-party approach to it, because we've got to get
You've talked about the importance of trust in politics. Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party made that promise in the election, and yet they've already retreated from it. Is that a problem in terms of trust in politics?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to make sure that we're as constructive as possible. So there's a key moment coming up on the 30th of October, the budget. And that's a key moment when they've got to show what they're really doing. And at the moment we're in the early stages of that, aren't we? And Liberal Democrats have already called for that to be a sort of emergency budget for our NHS and our care. And we'll be judging that on that. I mean, as I said to you, we built some trust back, we built a mandate based on making sure there are more GPs, more NHS dentists, more community pharmacists, that the care system is reformed. So whether it's social care or unpaid family carers, that they are supported. The carers allowance is reformed. It's shockingly bad that social care workers get a new higher minimum wage than the national living wage. These are the sorts of things we campaigned on. So these are the yardsticks we'll measure the government by.
Do you buy the Rachel Reeves analysis that she is having to do things because of the £22 billion black hole that she describes left by the Conservatives?
Well, I buy at least half of it. The half I buy is that the Conservatives left the country in a mess. I don't think that is in dispute.
And worse than we thought even a few months ago. Do you buy that?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I'm sure they found things that were unfunded, particularly in-year things, because the Conservatives ran the whole budget very badly. You don't talk to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, you look at what the Office of Budget Responsibility is saying. There is no doubt the Conservatives ran a shocking approach to our economy and our public finances. I think that is indisputable. I don't think that requires a winter fuel allowance to be abolished for the vast majority of pensioners. There are millions of pensioners who are struggling to get by. For them, the cost of living is still very much a real thing. They're seeing energy bills go up, with the Ofgem raising the cap by over 10% this winter. I mean, honestly, when I asked the Prime Minister about this, and I mentioned a case study of a carer, a full-time carer called Norman, looking after a wife who has MS and Alzheimer's, who had to go back to work full-time, not part-time, to raise the money to pay for the care costs. They're just above the limit on pension credit. They're going to be hit by that.
But do you think it's a very
that just
good
doesn't make
use of,
sense?
Is it a good use of public money to be subsidising the fuel bills of rich pensioners, which is what we currently do? I mean, you can have an argument about where the boundary should be and the threshold should be, and maybe the government's got that wrong. But in its principle, I mean, the coalition government of which you will remember made plenty of cuts to universality on plenty of things.
Yeah, listen, the system does have a whole series of ways of ensuring that the most wealthy don't get some of the benefits. I mean, the child benefit limit, for example, at 60,000. But this is why I don't agree with what Labour is doing, what the government is doing in this, because they're saying that people who are basically pensioners, whose incomes may be 13,000, 14,000, 15,000, that they shouldn't have that help. And that's a very serious mistake, I think. Pensioners are really struggling.
It is just, of course, a version of what you did in 2010, which is come in, find what you described at the time, and other Lib Dem ministers at the time talked about, a very difficult budgetary situation, and made all sorts of cuts on things like housing benefit cap, child benefit freeze, all sorts of things at the time that you had to do. Labour is basically using your playbook.
No, I think there's quite a big difference, actually. Well, for example, the Labour government was saying that it was going to be tough afterwards. They shared the analysis. There was no difference in the analysis that there was going to have to be some difficult decisions. That was consensus across the political parties. You didn't hear that from the Conservatives. They were trying to make out that everything is rosy. They're still trying to do it. I mean, I don't know if you heard Rishi Sunak this week at Prime Minister's Questions, almost making out that the economy was rosy, that everyone was happy, that it was all fantastic. I mean, they're living on another planet, Lewis.
But what I don't understand what the difference is between what you did and what Labour are doing. It's exactly the same. In fact, lots of Labour strategists are talking privately about copying the Osborne playbook, with which you were closely associated in government.
No, I mean, the difference I'm pointing to is that the government of Gordon Brown was making it really clear that after the election there'd be difficult choices. Indeed, the draft budget that was put in place had cuts as severe as anything the government then did.
So what should the government do instead to save this money? Because you've already said that you agree that there is a black hole.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
What should they do instead?
They've got to
take
some difficult decisions, no doubt about it.
But a different one.
Different ones, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
like
for
what?
example, well, let me give you some examples. We said during the general election that the number of sectors in our economy who are doing incredibly well, and they should be paying more tax. We talked about the social media giants, we talked about the banks, we talked about the oil and gas companies, and we talked about the really wealthy in society, the billionaires and so on, who pay less in capital gains tax in terms of a rate than the rest of us. So we put forward, I'm sure you remember this, some quite detailed proposals on changing capital gains tax. These are things that they could go to. And when it comes to the spending side, I mean, I'll give you an example. On the NHS, I think it is very short-term thinking not to invest in the NHS now. If you invest in the NHS up front, you reduce the waiting list, you get people able to see their GPs, you'll get lots of people back to work.
You talked a minute ago about the importance of optimism in politics and not being so gloomy. One of the criticisms that's been made of Starmer so far is that perhaps he has been a little gloomy. You know, you'd have seen the speech that he made a week ago where he talked about things are going to get worse before they get better and so on. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you think that the Prime Minister is being a little unduly pessimistic, perhaps for political reasons?
I think that is one area where I think the country needs to be encouraged to believe, because I think it is true, that there's a different way forward. But I think to get to that, you've got to be more ambitious. I mean, this is
more
the
ambitious
point.
Than he's being.
Yeah, I mean, Liberal Democrat approach, we put it out in the general election, I think it was widely acknowledged, we were being far more ambitious, far more bold, and I think that could have a really big impact. And let me give you a concrete example again. Go back to the European question, because, you know, we need to grow our economy. That's critical. Labour says that. Everyone says that.
Yeah.
So how are you going to do it? Well, you need trade. And the Conservatives put up the biggest trade barriers, increased costs on businesses more than any government has ever done. And so we've got to get out there and we've got to make sure that we get a new trade deal. The Brexit deal that Johnson et al. Gave to our country has been a disaster.
Single market?
Well, single market is certainly the objective, and we said that in our manifesto.
And you'd like to see that in this. You think Starmer should move towards that by the end of this Parliament?
Well, I think that there'll be steps that have to be taken before that. I mean, we set out in our manifesto a 4-stage process.
But would you like to see it by the end of this Parliament?
Well, in our manifesto we said, we didn't say put a time on at the end of this Parliament, because you can't actually, because these negotiations.
But ideally.
Well, you've got to make sure the other steps first. So the steps we set out were things like a new trade deal, which would be short of the single market, and as I've said very clearly, and this is coming a difference already. I mentioned it earlier, a youth mobility scheme.
Yeah.
And I think those are the sorts of things that can build the trust back, because just as I'm afraid there was trust lost with people in this country, there's a lot of trust lost between the UK and Europe. That's got to be rebuilt. That will take some time.
You mentioned one of the big stories which has happened this week, which is, of course, the Grenfell Inquiry report and the shocking details that contained, although perhaps not surprising. I mean, you'll know that Sir Martin Morbig cited specifically the attitude of the coalition government of 2010 to 15, of course, of which you remember, saying in particular that its attitude towards regulation and a kind of reflexive belief that regulation was a bad thing, the bonfire of regulation, as you remember the Prime Minister called it at the time, said that contributed directly to what happened at Grenfell. Do you regret that now?
Well, the part that Liberal Democrats played in that was often to say no to the Conservatives.
But clearly not enough, according to Sir Martin Morbig.
Well, I don't know what happened in Eric Pickle's department. I do know that there were parts of the Conservative government, not all of them, that didn't seem to take these issues seriously enough. I was asked about a regulation on fire retardant on furniture and it was suggested to me by parts of the side of the coalition that this should go. And guess what? I said no, and I stopped it, and we kept that.
Wasn't enough, though, was it?
Well, I'm talking about what I was responsible for, where I fought the Conservative agenda.
But I suppose what I'm trying to get at is, do you think that, leaving aside direct culpability for the Lib Dems and so on, but that belief at the time that the Conservatives had and the government had, of which you were part, that was a mistake and that you regret it, given it has been cited specifically in the Grenfell Inquiry report?
Yeah, and it really looks at Eric Pickle's department.
And your minister...
There may well have been other
But there was a Lib Dem minister in that department at the time, Andrew Stunnell, who was quite literally in charge of building regulations.
Well, there were others too. And what I would say is that clearly everyone who's involved... In fact, if you read the inquiries I'm doing, it goes back decades, and I said on behalf of my party, as did, to be fair, the Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak, we all should say sorry, because we all, over decades, have not taken this seriously enough.
You're sorry for the Lib Dems part in it?
I said that in Parliament. What I would say is that the way we got to respond to it has got to be by listening to the inquiry's recommendations and making sure they're implemented. And the Deputy Prime Minister is really pushing on cladding. That's good. We need to go further and faster than has been achieved hitherto. But and go back to what the Prime Minister said: the culture, systemic change. That's what we need. That's what Liberal Democrats have argued for in this and other areas. And unless we do that and really understand, I'm afraid we'll see scandals in the future. The political class has to understand that systems have to change.
Do you think prosecutions for this should be expedited, in the sense that the families have already had to wait so long?
Oh, yeah.
And the Metropolitan Police, on the current timetable, and the CPS are saying that this could be some years still. I mean, some of the people involved, relatives have died. Do you think that this should be expedited, if possible?
Yeah, I mean, when you listen to the families, they talk about justice. I mean, yes, there's the truth now there. The inquiry has done an amazing job in really going into the dishonesty amongst the manufacturers, for example, or the whole story which we're beginning to learn. But the families want justice, and they're right. They've had to wait so long. Waiting years more would be an injustice in itself. So I asked the Prime Minister, will he make sure that the prosecutors, the police, the courts have all the resources they need to get justice as swiftly as possible? He agreed with that, and we've got to see there should be sufficient resources to make sure justice can be provided as swiftly as possible.
One of the other big stories of the week has obviously been the government taking away 30 arms licences to Israel of the 350 or so that we provide. Did that go far enough for you, given what we know is going on in Israel at the moment?
Well, first of all, I welcome there's been some movement. I think anyone who's looked at this situation dispassionately and looked at the international legal obligations this country has, knew that the previous government's position didn't wash. I mean, international law, humanitarian law, our human rights obligations and so on really meant that we had to take action. You asked me whether it's gone far enough. I doubt it. I mean, Liberal Democrat policy has been for some time that there's a presumption to deny licences for arms exports if a country is on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's list of countries where there are human rights abuses. And there are a number of countries like that, and Israel is one of them. Mm-hmm. So our position has been that there's a presumption that we shouldn't be giving arms licences to Israel, so it sort of follows that. I don't think the government went far enough.
You would like to see a complete cessation?
Well, I'd like to see the legal advice. And
you'd like to see the government publish the legal advice?
We called for that before the election, I call for it now. And I think I would imagine that advice, if it looks at the illegal obligations of the country, of our great country, would require more action. I mean, look at what's happening in the West Bank at the moment. I mean, that is shocking. So I do think whether it's the lack of aid getting in, the humanitarian disaster in Gaza, what's treatment of prisoners, a whole range of things that suggest that there is a legal obligation on a country to go further.
What do you make of the chief rabbi suggesting that it was an insult to the people of Israel?
Well, the chief rabbi can have his opinions, of course he can. And, I think this debate needs to be...
Boris Johnson said the same thing.
Well, I think we need to listen to everybody in this debate. I think it's really unhelpful to have lots of divides up. We need to try to bring people together and explain our position. And again, to be fair to the Prime Minister, although I'd like him to have gone further, he was really clear that this is what the law demanded. And I would just urge everybody, from whatever position they come from, people who think the government's not gone far enough, or people who think it's gone too far, let's have an argument based on what is legally required. Let's have an argument based on the facts. It's so difficult. Let's remember Hamas's atrocities on the 7th of October. They should never be forgotten. Let's remember they are holding innocent Israelis hostage. And so the Hamas are terrorists, and you can understand what people are up against. But on the other hand, it's still, that doesn't allow anyone to break international law and humanitarian law.
One final thing in terms of the politics of the summer, or since the election anyway. Obviously the big story of the summer in some ways was the riots that we saw. Far-right riots we saw take place in the streets and cities of Britain. An unlikely character, or side character in all of this, has been Elon Musk, and the role of Twitter itself in terms of spreading clear misinformation. In some cases, it has been argued, actual incitement, particularly from some characters like Tommy Robinson. What do you make of how we should deal with sites like Twitter in the future? Is there a case for stronger regulation?
Yeah. I think it's got to be done carefully, because, actually I believe in free speech.
You're a liberal.
I'm a liberal. However, here's the issue with X and all social media. It's not just X at all. It's social media more broadly, which I think governments across the world have to grapple with. And that's their tendency to use algorithms that put in front of people things that's really controversial and contentious and raises the temperature. And it deliberately does that to draw people's attention in. And
have you brought that up with Nick Clegg?
Well, I would do if we have a conversation about it. But the point is this: I think the government should be focused on this. I think you should talk to other governments. If you are allowing any media company to raise the temperature, raise the divisions, raise the hate in your country, that's not good. And yes, let's have free speech, but don't have a system with these algorithms that actually raises the temperature. So I'm not an expert, Lewis, on all the detail of this, and no doubt people will write to me telling me after this interview that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Perhaps you're a former party leader.
But I am determined, having talked to a number of people in the party and people who do know about this, that this is an area we really have to look at.
You do think all of the social media sites are responsible in that way that you just said, algorithmically, including,
well, as I said,
Twitter, Facebook, the rest?
I'm not an expert, but I think all of them need to abide by stronger regulations, yes.
Have you thought yourself, because there was a particular role that Twitter played this summer, for example, it's allowed Tommy Robinson back, spreading the sort of bilious hate that he does, lies that he does, and others, not just him. It has become a bit of a sewer. I'm sure you've noticed that as a user of it yourself. Have you considered stopping using it, withdrawing from it?
Yeah, I'm not a great user of it, I'll be honest with you. However, whether it's in what we're seeing in the States, and you've been covering the DNC convention and Kamala Harris's campaign when you were over in Chicago, you will have seen what's happening there on X. And I think all of us are looking at how we use it and think about it. But not actually pulling out of it is terribly helpful. The issue is, what are we going to do about it?
Well, political parties could just basically say, this is a sewer. We are giving it legitimacy in the British political sphere, so we're just not going to post on it anymore. Is it just something that you might think about if the standards on it were to decline yet further?
I'm more focused not on making those sorts of gestures. I'm more focused on how we can put it right. There is a wrong. I've been really clear about that. Mm-hmm. I'm not happy with the current situation. I don't think anyone should be happy with it. And therefore we need to look at how we can get rid of this, as you say, gutter stuff, and find a way where people can express themselves freely, but the system and the platforms that they use to do that aren't used to then create this hate and division. I think that's the challenge.
Since you just mentioned the US, how do you think we would fare under a second Trump presidency, the UK?
Well,
it's looking more likely.
Well, I don't know. I'm very worried about it.
You're worried about it?
Don't think it's good for the world. I think it's good for America. You'll be really shocked to know that I think the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz campaign is really exciting. It's fun and joyous. I remember having fun and joyous
campaigns. Perhaps they've taken inspiration from the Ed Davey campain, Ed.
They haven't contacted us, and I can imagine they've got.
Is there a bungee jump in Pittsburgh somewhere available for Kamala?
Well, she'd be really good at it. What I would say is, it's interesting though, isn't it? The way to counteract this hate and division that we see from too many politicians and what you were talking about on X, the way to counter that is by having a bit more optimism, by having a bit more joy, having a bit more fun, showing that actually we get people's real issues. And I think that's it. I mean, the stuff that sometimes gets talked about seems to be so far from reality. And the whole Liberal Democrat campaign, to come back to that, our conference, will be about the things that matter to people: health and care, cost of living, the environment. These are things that really people care about, and I don't see them on my X feed, you know.
Well, I don't think you're likely to see them anytime soon, as long as Elon's there, but let's leave that. Finally, Ed, I mean, look, you are sat here now, as we say, 72 MPs, biggest third-party leader for a century in the British Parliament. What's next? I mean, clearly you're unassailable in your current position. I assume you want to be leader until the end of this Parliament, at least. You'll take the Liberal Democrats into the next election. Am I right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're already planning the next election stunts, you know.
Give us a hint.
I'm really looking forward to the next election campaign.
You want to lead the party through to the next election?
Of course I do. Yeah. Of course I do. I mean, because I want to finish the job.
And what is that? That's what I want to ask. What does that look like? What is the job? Is it to become the opposition, the actual main opposition? You're only 50 away from the Conservative Party. It's not unthinkable that you could become the second party.
We've only just had the election. We've got a job to do.
I know, but come on.
Well, hold on. Let me finish. We've just been elected. I said, didn't I, earlier in this interview, that we need to honour what people have asked us to do. The trust they put on us, which is around health and care and cost of living and the things that matter to people. So we're going to focus in on that. We're doing our job as being constructive opposition. We're going to do all that, and we're going to offer more optimism and hope that's currently being offered by anyone. So we're going to do all that. And I think if we do that, who knows where that will go. I think it's absolutely clear that the Conservatives should be consigned to history. The way they have run our country for so long has been so atrocious. They've undermined so many aspects of our nation.
Do you think it's possible that, because they only have 120 MPs, it is being widely said, even within Conservative circles, one wrong move, and perhaps they will be consigned to history? Do you think it's possible that the Conservative Party could die?
Listen, I'm not going to speculate on that. What I am going to speculate on is if we do our job well, if the 72 MPs who've just been elected show they are local champions for the area, but that we can come together on these big issues that affect millions of people, like opposing the winter fuel payment, because that affects millions of pensioners, like making sure there's an emergency budget for our NHS and care on the 30th of October. If we can show that they're the issues that we care about, I think we will win millions over. And what was so interesting, Lewis, in this election campaign, we talked to many, many voters, millions of voters actually, and it was those former lifelong Conservative voters where we had the most interesting conversations, and why I think the chances for us to finish the job, particularly with respect to the Conservative Party and take more seats off the Conservative Party, is a genuine one. These people have seen through the Conservative Party. It's a party who no longer cares about so many ordinary people. They've taken them for granted. They're just out of touch. And I think if we can show that we're not like that, but we share their values of decency, of fairness, of the rule of law, believing in a market economy, all the things that Liberals do.
Well, can I put it this way then? You have talked very often about smashing the blue wall. And look, in so many ways you did, not just in the general election, where you won so many seats that you'd never held before.
But there's a few more bricks left, and I'm after them.
You're after the remaining bricks. That's
Too
fair
right.
to say.
Absolutely.
And you think you can do it.
Yeah.
Starting presumably as well with the local elections next year, where there are lots of potential pickups for
There's the county elections next year and a number of unitary authorities. And guess what? We're already thinking about them.
So this Conservative leadership campaign, where there is so much attention on reform and the threat that reform poses to the Conservatives, they should be paying more attention to you.
I'll let the Conservative leadership candidates decide what they want to do. My job is not to tell other parties what to do. My job is to lead the Liberal Democrats.
Do any of them, think pose a, looking at them, of the candidates, do any of them, do you think, pose a particular threat to you?
Let me let you into a little secret.
Oh, go on then. Between you, me and the Foxes.
Yeah. Who've yet to appear, actually.
I know, well, it's because they're so transfixed by what you're saying.
Yeah, they're listening, I'm sure.
Yeah. They've heard it all before, no doubt.
My secret is this. I don't actually spend a load of time thinking about other parties. I have a party to lead. And that it takes up my focus and my time. And this is the difference I want to bring. And I think our party is uniquely able to do that. Let us show people what we're about. Let us show people our distinctive role. Let us show actually there's a different way forward. You can be more bold. You can be more ambitious. You can be more hopeful. And if I do that, if the party does that, and I think you'll see a lot of that at our conference in Brighton this year, I think then we will earn not just the trust we've already earned, but more, and we can knock down the rest of the blue wall, and we can be the big surprise in British politics.
Ed Davey, thanks so much for letting us into your home.
Thank you.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.